She told me I came into her life at the wrong time, but some connections aren't meant to wait. It was a late afternoon in early spring when I first met her, my friend's aunt. I had been invited to a casual gathering at his house, the kind where the chatter is light, the smell of coffee lingers, and sunlight filters lazily through sheer curtains. I remember stepping into the living room, greeted by familiar faces, but then she appeared, and somehow, the world narrowed just a little. She was exactly 40, though the years had only added to her quiet elegance rather than taking away. She carried herself with a natural poise, moving around the room in soft, deliberate steps that somehow seemed effortless. Her hair, a chestnut cascade just brushing her shoulders, caught the sunlight, and when she laughed at a passing joke, it was light, melodic, and entirely her own. I caught myself staring for longer than was polite, feeling the strange mix of admiration and nerves that always comes with meeting someone who feels unexpectedly magnetic. There was something about her presence that demanded attention without demanding it, an easy confidence tempered by a softness I couldn't quite place. Her eyes, warm and slightly curious, scanned the room with quiet amusement, occasionally meeting mine in a glance that made me shift slightly, self-conscious yet undeniably drawn. Even the subtle sway of her hand as she brushed a loose strand of hair behind her ear seemed deliberate, graceful, and somehow intimate in a way I couldn't explain. We hadn't even spoken yet, and I already felt the pull of curiosity. My friend, oblivious to the tension in the air, introduced us casually, but the simple act of shaking her hand seemed heavier than it should have been. Her touch was light but confident, leaving a faint warmth that lingered longer than expected. For a moment, I wasn't just a guest. I was someone she was assessing, someone I wanted her to see as more than the 20-something boy I still felt like inside. As the afternoon stretched on, our interactions were brief but meaningful. A shared laugh at a joke she told, a fleeting exchange of glances across the room, small gestures that hinted at something more beneath the surface. I noticed the subtle details, the way her outfit, a soft cream blouse paired with tailored trousers, complemented her figure without drawing unnecessary attention, the way her perfume was understated yet unforgettable. By the time the sun had dipped low, casting warm gold across the living room, I realized that meeting her had unsettled something inside me. It wasn't just attraction. It was curiosity, admiration, and a quiet, unspoken recognition that this encounter might be more than fleeting. She had entered the room like sunlight, subtle but undeniable, and I had no idea how I was supposed to respond. Even now, I can't remember the exact words we exchanged, only the way her presence felt. Familiar, yet completely new. That afternoon planted a seed of intrigue and longing, one I didn't know how to name, but one I knew would grow in ways I couldn't yet imagine. The first real moment we shared alone didn't happen during the laughter-filled chaos of the gathering, but quietly, in the kitchen. I had gone to fetch a drink, and she was already there, leaning slightly against the counter, casually stirring her tea. There was something natural about the way she moved, a rhythm that made the mundane feel intimate. For a moment, our eyes met, and I noticed the curiosity there. The subtle way she tilted her head, as if deciding whether to engage or retreat. "Hey," I said, voice slightly higher than intended. She smiled at me. Warm, gentle, and completely disarming. It wasn't flirtation exactly. It was the kind of smile that makes someone feel seen without saying a word. We ended up talking about trivial things at first. The weather, a recipe she liked, her favorite coffee blend. But the ordinary nature of the conversation didn't feel ordinary at all. There was a rhythm to it, a quiet understanding that flowed naturally between us. Every gesture she made, the way she tucked a loose strand of hair behind her ear, the subtle lift of her eyebrows when she laughed, was magnetic in a way I didn't expect. I was painfully aware of the age gap, of the life experiences between us, but that awareness didn't push me away. It made me more curious, more intent on listening, on understanding her. At one point, our hands brushed while reaching for the same glass. I froze for a heartbeat, acutely aware of the warmth radiating from her skin, the soft yet firm way she held the glass. She looked at me then, a faint hint of surprise in her eyes, followed by that same gentle, knowing smile. Nothing was said, but the moment hung between us. Charged, delicate, fleeting. It was a silent acknowledgement that something unspoken had passed, a quiet awareness neither of us could name yet. Her vulnerability peeked through in small, almost imperceptible ways. A brief sigh as she spoke about a minor challenge at work, a subtle crease between her brows when she laughed at herself. It was a reminder that beneath her calm, confident exterior, there was a woman with her own complexities and quiet battles. And I felt drawn to that side of her, a desire to offer empathy without intruding, to connect without overstepping boundaries. The kitchen, normally mundane, felt intimate. The afternoon light spilled over the counters, soft and golden, casting gentle shadows on her face. I noticed the faint fragrance she wore, something warm, comforting, slightly floral. It lingered in the air and seemed to cling to the moment itself, making it feel weightier than it should. By the time we returned to the living room, I realized something had shifted. That brief encounter had stretched beyond small talk. It had been the first thread of connection, fragile yet undeniable. I didn't know what it meant, and I wasn't sure I was ready to name it, but I knew that leaving it unexplored wasn't an option. That day, in a quiet kitchen corner, I had glimpsed a depth in her that was both tantalizing and terrifying, and I felt, for the first time, that this story might be about more than casual acquaintance. It might be the beginning of something quietly consuming. It was the kind of late afternoon that felt almost cinematic. The sun low, casting a warm, golden glow over the quiet streets. I had accompanied her on a small errand, a quick walk to the corner shop to pick up something she needed. It wasn't a big deal, not in the grand scheme of life, yet somehow walking beside her felt extraordinary. We fell into an easy rhythm immediately, our steps almost syncing, as though we had done this before. She told a story about a mishap at her workplace, animatedly using her hands to paint the picture, and I laughed. Not just out of politeness, but because her humor was genuine, effortless. She laughed too, leaning slightly toward me for emphasis, and in that moment, her shoulder brushed mine. The contact was fleeting, yet it carried a weight neither of us addressed. It was neither daring nor intentional. It was simply a shared physical space, a silent acknowledgement of closeness. What struck me most was how natural it felt. There was no pressure, no pretense. We weren't two people forced into conversation by circumstance. We were two people discovering the comfort of each other's presence. Every little gesture, the tilt of her head, the way she paused before the punchline of her story, the sparkle in her eyes, pulled me in, leaving me acutely aware of her, and yet entirely at ease. She had dressed simply but elegantly. A light blouse paired with jeans, the sleeves rolled up just slightly, revealing delicate wrists. I noticed the subtle fragrance she carried, something faintly floral, soft, and grounding. It seemed to linger in the spaces between our words, a quiet reminder of her presence that followed me even when I wasn't looking directly at her. We laughed at little things. The way a dog ran after a bouncing ball, a funny misstep she made on the sidewalk. Each moment, trivial in itself, felt heavier because it was shared. Her laughter had a warmth to it that made me feel simultaneously protective and exhilarated. For a moment, I almost forgot the world beyond that golden street, beyond the quiet rhythm of our steps. At one point, she paused to adjust her hair, glancing at me with an expression that was playful yet fleetingly vulnerable. I wanted to say something, anything, to bridge the gap I felt between us. But the moment passed, leaving only the lingering awareness that she had opened a small door, and I had stepped tentatively into a space I wasn't sure I was ready for. The walk ended, reluctantly, back at her doorstep. We exchanged a polite but lingering goodbye, a touch on the forearm that seemed to last just a second longer than necessary. Her eyes met mine, and in that quiet glance, I felt the unspoken understanding. Neither of us could ignore the curiosity, the connection, the subtle pull building between us. That afternoon was insignificant in the eyes of the world, but to me it was a turning point. The shared laughter, the brushing of shoulders, the ease of conversation. It all planted seeds of something deeper. It was a small, fragile intimacy, but one that made the coming days feel electric with possibility, hinting at a story far more complicated, far more consuming, than either of us could yet articulate. It happened one quiet evening, long after the bustle of our initial meetings had settled into something calmer and more personal. I had stopped by her house to return a book I'd borrowed for a recommendation, and found her sitting alone on the couch, a warm throw draped over her shoulders, the soft hum of a lamp filling the otherwise dimly lit room. There was a quietness about her then, an almost tangible stillness that made the air feel heavier, and I realized she hadn't been expecting company, or perhaps she had, and it simply didn't matter. She looked up when I entered, surprised, and then smiled. A little shy, a little hesitant, but still unmistakably her. "I didn't expect you," she said, voice soft, carrying a weight I wasn't prepared for. I offered a small shrug, letting my presence speak before words could. "I thought I'd drop by. Just thought you might like some company." For a long while we just sat there, side by side on the couch, not speaking. The silence wasn't uncomfortable. It was fragile, like the pause before the first note of a song that hits you unexpectedly. I noticed the subtle ways she fidgeted, her fingers tracing the edge of the throw, a soft sigh escaping her lips, the brief furrow of her brow when she looked at the floor. There was an unspoken tension, one that spoke louder than words could. Then, slowly, she began to speak. Not about anything trivial, but about something deeply personal. A work challenge that had been weighing on her. A fear she rarely admitted aloud. The loneliness that sometimes settled over her even when she was surrounded by people. Her voice was steady but quiet, a little vulnerable, and each word seemed deliberate, chosen with care. I listened, trying to remain present, aware of the delicate line between empathy and intrusion. At one point, she brushed a hand across her face, tucking a loose strand of hair behind her ear in the same way she always did. But this time, it felt different, intimate, like an invitation to notice her as she truly was. Without thinking, my hand found hers. It was light, almost tentative, a gesture of comfort, and yet it carried more than either of us admitted. She didn't pull away. Instead, her fingers curled slightly around mine, brief but meaningful, grounding us both in the moment. The lamp cast warm shadows across the room, softening the lines of her face and highlighting the subtle vulnerability in her eyes. For the first time, I saw beyond her confident exterior, glimpsing the woman she was when no one was watching, complex, delicate, quietly brave. And I felt a mix of awe, protectiveness, and a longing I wasn't ready to name. We didn't talk about us, about what was beginning to stir between us. It wasn't necessary. The unspoken understanding hung in the air like the faint scent of her perfume, persistent and comforting. I realized that connection wasn't about grand gestures or declarations. It was about noticing, truly noticing, and being present for someone in their rawest moments. That night, as I left her doorstep, I felt a shift within me. The bond had deepened in ways I couldn't fully comprehend. It was fragile, delicate, and fraught with the weight of what neither of us had yet dared to acknowledge. But it was real. And in that quiet, unassuming vulnerability, I found myself utterly captivated. It was a quiet evening when the words finally came, carried on a weight I had been sensing but hadn't fully acknowledged. We were sitting across from each other at a small cafe terrace, the city lights just beginning to blink on, reflected faintly in the glass of our drinks. The chatter of other patrons felt distant, almost irrelevant, as if the world had shrunk down to the small circle of light and warmth that surrounded us. She stirred her tea absent-mindedly, fingers tracing the rim of the cup, and for a moment I hesitated to speak. The air between us was charged, not with tension born of anger or fear, but with something quieter, heavier, almost fragile. She looked up then, her gaze meeting mine with that familiar blend of strength and vulnerability, and I knew the moment had arrived. You came into my life at the wrong time," she said softly, as though testing the words against the air before letting them fall. There was no reproach in her tone, no bitterness, just the honest ache of someone caught between desire and circumstance. The words hung between us, delicate but unyielding, and I felt a pang deep in my chest. I wanted to reach for her hand, to bridge the space between us, but I paused, respecting the boundary she had drawn. Instead, I let my eyes speak for me, full of understanding, empathy, and the quiet longing I had been trying to mask. She noticed, and for a brief moment, her lips curved into a half-smile, fleeting and bittersweet. She began to explain, gently, the reasons why the timing was off. Past commitments, responsibilities that weighed heavily, and experiences that had shaped her life in ways I couldn't fully grasp. Yet even as she spoke of obstacles, there was a subtle tension in her posture, a hesitation in her words that betrayed what she truly felt. It was as if every sentence was a careful negotiation between the heart she wanted to follow and the life she had to honor. I listened closely, absorbing every nuance. The way she folded her hands tightly together, the way her shoulders tensed slightly when she glanced away, the soft inhale before she continued. There was vulnerability in the way she allowed herself to speak honestly, and it made me more aware than ever of how deeply I cared, and how much I wanted to offer comfort without overstepping. For a long while, we simply sat there in silence after she spoke, letting the words settle between us. I reached across the table, lightly brushing my fingers against hers, not demanding anything but offering a quiet acknowledgement of the connection that had grown between us. She held my gaze, and I saw a flicker of gratitude, relief, and something else, an unspoken longing that mirrored my own. That night, as we finally rose to leave, the tension didn't vanish. It shifted, transforming into something tender, quiet, and real. The confession hadn't closed the distance between us. It had defined it, marked it with honesty. Yet in that honesty, there was a subtle intimacy that neither time nor circumstance could erase. We walked away knowing that our connection had grown deeper, fragile but undeniable, and that whatever the future held, this moment would linger in both of us, quietly shaping everything to come. In the days after her confession, something between us had shifted, subtle, almost imperceptible, yet impossible to ignore. Our interactions carried a quiet weight now, a gentle pull neither of us dared to name aloud. We spent more time together in small, unplanned moments, helping her carry groceries, sharing a quiet walk in the park, or sitting side by side on her couch while she read or I scrolled absent-mindedly on my phone. Each moment felt ordinary at first glance, but beneath the surface, it was charged with a soft electricity that made my heart race in ways I didn't quite understand. One evening, we found ourselves curled up on her couch watching an old movie. She had wrapped herself in a knitted throw, and I sat just close enough that the warmth of her shoulder brushed mine every so often. There was no intent in the proximity, and yet every accidental touch sent a jolt through me, a reminder that closeness could be both comforting and maddeningly intimate. She laughed quietly at a scene, and I caught the subtle tilt of her head toward me, as if seeking shared enjoyment, shared presence. I found myself leaning slightly closer, not wanting to cross the line, yet craving the nearness. She handed me a mug of tea, her fingers brushing mine lightly in the exchange. It was a small, fleeting contact, but the warmth lingered longer than expected. Our eyes met, and for a brief, suspended moment, the world outside the room ceased to exist. I wanted to speak, to name what was beginning to bloom between us, but the words faltered, replaced by the silent understanding that sometimes, closeness itself is the language. During these days, I began noticing details I had overlooked before. The subtle curve of her smile when she thought no one was watching, the way she tucked her hair behind her ear absent-mindedly, the gentle rise and fall of her breath when she relaxed in quiet moments. Even her perfume, faint but familiar, seemed to linger just enough to make the space feel like a private world we were creating together. Yet with every shared laugh, every brushed hand, there was the constant awareness of boundaries. Her life, my youth, the timing that had already been declared wrong. It made every moment sweeter and more painful at once. I found myself savoring the small gestures. Her resting her hand lightly on mine as she reached for the remote, the brief, unplanned shoulder brushes when we walked through narrow doorways, the way she leaned into me just slightly while reading. Each contact was a quiet dialogue of trust, warmth, and longing, one that neither of us needed to voice. By the time I left her that night, a gentle tension had settled in my chest, a mixture of satisfaction and yearning. We were close, undeniably close, yet so much remained unsaid. The lingering warmth of her presence stayed with me long after the door closed behind me. It was a closeness that went beyond touch, beyond conversation. It was the quiet intimacy of being seen, of being trusted, and of understanding that some bonds don't need labels to be profound. In those days, our connection became a silent heartbeat between us, subtle but impossible to ignore. It was the space between glances, the brush of hands, the warmth shared in quiet moments. It was a closeness that hinted at something more, something delicate yet consuming, and it left me both exhilarated and painfully aware of the line we still hadn't crossed. It was twilight when we finally found ourselves alone again, standing on the quiet street outside her home. The city had settled into a gentle hush, the last golden rays of the sun mingling with the cool, early evening air. Everything felt suspended in that moment: time, thought, expectation, leaving only the space between us, charged with the weight of what had grown silently over weeks of shared moments, laughter, and quiet intimacy. She looked at me with a softness I had not seen before, a mixture of strength and vulnerability that always left me unsteady. "I'm glad you came," she said, voice low, almost hesitant. Her words carried more than their simple meaning. They were acknowledgement, recognition, and something like relief all at once. I felt the pull of all the unspoken words that had built between us, the silent conversations we had carried through glances, touches, and proximity. We lingered, neither of us stepping closer nor further away. She shifted slightly, brushing a hand against mine. Not deliberately, but naturally, like it was the most comfortable position in the world. My fingers brushed hers, hesitant, tentative, but she didn't pull away. The small contact carried the weight of everything we had shared. The curiosity, the laughter, the subtle vulnerability, and the emotional intimacy that had grown quietly but relentlessly. "I know I said you came into my life at the wrong time," she continued, a faint smile touching her lips. "But some things can't be ignored." She paused, and I could see the flicker of hope and fear in her eyes, the tension of wanting to reach for something that seemed both impossible and inevitable. I didn't speak immediately. Instead, I let the silence carry us, letting my presence show what words could not. Then, slowly, I reached out, lightly brushing a strand of hair from her face. She leaned slightly into the touch, her eyes meeting mine, and for a moment, it felt as though the world outside had ceased to exist entirely. There was no rush, no pressure, just the quiet acknowledgement that our connection was real, fragile, and precious. We didn't need to define it right then, didn't need to promise anything more than what we already had. The shared warmth, the lingering glances, the gentle touches, they spoke louder than any words ever could. Standing there in the soft twilight, I understood that love and connection weren't always about perfect timing or easy paths. They were about presence, honesty, and allowing yourself to feel fully, even if life was complicated. Finally, she stepped closer and gave me a brief, meaningful hug. Her head rested lightly against my shoulder, and I held her with the care and tenderness that had grown naturally between us. When we pulled back, she smiled. A quiet, confident smile that carried both acceptance and hope. I smiled in return, feeling the same, and for the first time, the uncertainty that had weighed so heavily seemed lighter, softer. As we parted that evening, the lingering warmth of her presence stayed with me. The connection between us had been honored, and though the future remained uncertain, there was no doubt that this bond, this quiet, unspoken, deeply human intimacy, would leave its mark on both of us forever. Some connections, I realized, don't need labels to be real. They just need to be felt, respected, and carried forward with honesty. If this story made your heart race or reminded you of a connection you've never forgotten, hit that like button, share your thoughts in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe for more slow burn, age gap romance stories that linger long after the screen goes dark.